Greetings and salutations, everyone. I am GMC, and welcome to another edition of RABS, Random Acts of Bull Schnikes. Insert whatever word you wish. So, what's on tap for this week? Well, what's on tap is Appalachian Brewing Company's Purest Pale Ale. Look for it soon in a brew review. Maybe not soon, but not that bad. Okay, so I was looking through the internet, excuse me, and came across something. They showed the first. Well, they didn't exactly show it, but they showed somebody watching the first pictures of the new World of Warcraft movie, which is due out very shortly in the year 2016. Pardon me. Yeah, I think it's 2016. It's a long ways away. But for anybody that has ever wondered, I've played World of Warcraft. I played all the Warcrafts, and a lot of people are kind of on the fence about Warcraft. A lot of misconceptions about the game. I personally love the story. I'm a very story-driven type of guy where if I'm playing a game, I have to be the story has to draw me in. I have to be concerned with what I'm doing or who I'm doing it to. I think that's why I like the Mass Effect games so much. Is I love the story of Mass Effect. Even Dragon Age is a great story. Fallout, great story. So the Warcraft story, it started off as very basic, very black and white, very good versus evil, but as time went on, the shades of gray started coming into play, where both sides, the Alliance and the Horde, it's no longer about good or evil. World of Warcraft will tell you flat out, there is no good, there is no evil with the Alliance and Horde. They're both looking for self-preservation is their number one priority. But when the chips are down and there's a greater evil to fight, they will put aside their problems and they will fight together. That seems to be the big draw to Warcraft. Now, the original games were RTSs, real-time strategy games, where you would build your army, you'd collect resources, you'd build your army, you'd go and you'd fight the other army. And the first couple of games revolved around, you could either play as the humans or the orcs. And the orcs were always classified as the bad guys. It's really one of the first games I can remember that I ever played where you could be a bad guy. I always thought that was kind of a cool concept, because you always got to see the good guy side of things, but you want to see what the bad guys are like. And like I said, very black and white, very PB&J, where the orcs are obviously the bad guys, the humans are the good guys. Warcraft 2 kind of just expanded on that. They added new races, new characters. That was where the Alliance and the Horde were first established. The Alliance is humans, dwarves, elves, gnomes. This was Warcraft 2, by the way, just those four. And then the Horde was the orcs, trolls, the ogres, and Death Knights, like the undead, because they had necromancers and everything like that. But Warcraft 3 really changed things up, because the story it's like 10, 20 years after the second game, and the orcs were pretty much abandoned on Azeroth, the land that they are in, because Warcraft 2 had an expansion where you went to the orc homeworld of Draenor and tried to stop the orcs at their home base, or their home world. And and the orc shaman known as Nerzul opens up all these portals to escape, and literally destroys all of Draenor. That creates Outland, a area you can go to in World of Warcraft. However, Warcraft 3 story takes place after all that, where the orcs on Azeroth they've become slow, lethargic, they don't care anymore. They're in these internment camps where they're not even fighting each other anymore. They're just laying around waiting to die. Until a young orc by the name of Thrall arrives, who was found as a child, raised by a human lord to be a gladiator, slave, and Thrall is both the Spartacus and the Moses of the orcs. Best way I could describe him, he's like the Spartacus because he was a slave and then became a gladiator and then rose up and fought the oppression. And he's like Moses because he's saying, like, let my people go. Because he's running around saving all the orcs from internment camps. He's giving them a purpose. The difference is, Thrall doesn't want to fight the humans. He only wants to find a place for his people to live in peace. Because they're stuck here, they might as well make the best of it. So Warcraft 3 is kind of that story. Because the tutorial levels of Warcraft 3, you play as the orcs, as Thrall, rescuing his people. And then they get into a ship and they sail off because there's this prophet who tells them, you will find your destiny across the sea to Kalimdor, the distant land, and there you will find your destiny and probably other things. Warcraft 3 opened up 4 races this time. You play as the humans, you play as the orcs, then you play as the undead, and the night elves. A purple race of elves. Each one had their own story, had their own advantages and everything like that. The humans were pretty much always your basic bread and butter soldiers. They fought well. They had basic soldiers. Really nothing spectacular. They would get the job done with whatever they had. The orcs were always kind of a little tougher. They were a little stronger. Which makes sense because they're orcs. Warcraft 3 also introduced one of my favorite races to play as, the Tauren. The Tauren are bipedal cows. They're like humanoid cows. Not like centaur, or not centaur, but minotaurs. They're not like minotaurs because minotaurs are like half man, half bull. These were just cows that evolved into like walking, talking bovines. I love the Taurens. They're huge characters in World of Warcraft. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Like the orcs, like I said, they were more powerful. They were the more powerful team. The undead, the Scourge, was more of like your Zerg in StarCraft, where the units were cheap, they were easy to make, and there was enough of them to, like, you could just overrun your enemies. Like the I guess the Necromancers. They could just, you could have you could auto cast Raise Dead. Whenever there's bodies laying around, they would just auto cast, and all of a sudden these skeletons would just pop up. And they'd keep auto casting until they ran out of mana. And you could have just an army of skeletons. They weren't that strong, but you could weaken down the enemy enough to bring in your main force. And the Night Elves were more... I didn't like the Night Elves. Because their main soldiers, their basic soldiers, were archers, and archers aren't that good. They could all shadow meld, though, which is kind of cool. They can go invisible, as long as they're not moving. Now, the storyline to that was... It really centered around the Prince of Lordaeron, Arthas, who... it's really kind of the best of intentions. Like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, kind of thing. Arthas, his people are dying because of the Scourge. They've unleashed this plague of undeath. and he tracks down the Dreadlord demon who has unleashed this plague, or so he thinks. He ends up finding this cursed sword, Frostmourne, which I have in the corner. He picks it up and it steals his soul. And the evil that he has spent his entire life fighting, he has now become. And then as the undead, you take over Lordaeron, you take over Azeroth. Then as the orcs, you find your home, you find your new home world, fight your own personal demons. The Night Elves are brought in to kind of bring everybody together, because the very last level of Warcraft has you fighting the undead, but it's the humans, the orcs, and the Night Elves working together. So it's kind of the glue that brings everything together. But there was one expansion for Warcraft 3. That was the Frozen Throne. And that's when Arthas assumed the role of the Lich King, where the orc shaman, Ner'zhul, his spirit is torn to pieces by the demons that sent the orcs through the portals the first time. And Ner'zhul fuses his spirit with Arthas to become the Lich King, like one being. I have my own personal thing about that. But World of Warcraft. I will say that, yes, I have played this. I started very late in the game. Burning Crusade had just come out. That was the very first expansion or add-on. And I had watched the South Park episode, Make Love, Not Warcraft. Love that episode. One of my favorites. And I'm thinking, okay, this game looks really fun. And I like the Warcraft universe. I'll buy it. Why not? So I went and bought it. Dirt cheap. It was like 20 bucks. The expansion was another 20. So there you go, 40 bucks. I installed it on my computer and started playing. And I fell in love with it. Because it's an RPG. It's an MMO RPG. Massive multiplayer online, whatever. Again, I love RPGs. I can't help it. I like pretending to be somebody. That's why I love D&D. I wish I could find other D&D players. I'm sure they're around. I just can't find them. Pardon me. But they call them your main character, like the one that you start with or you play as the most. I was a Blood Elf rogue. And rogues were awesome because they could stealth. You could be invisible, you could sneak around places. If your stealth rating was really high, you could sneak through the main capitals of the enemy's fortress, and as soon as you attack somebody, you would become visible. So I would, just for the fun of it, I would just walk through their main capital and see if I could make it through, which I usually did. But a lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about this game, because I will admit, it does get repetitive after a while, but it only gets repetitive if you let it get repetitive. If you do the same quests over and over again, yes, it's going to get boring. If you go to other areas to do different things, it might be a little bit more exciting, but most of the quests usually revolve around collecting 10 wolf pelts for somebody who just is too lazy to go do it themselves, or to kill 10 bears because, again, the hunters are too lazy to do it themselves. Me and my cousins always joke about that. There's some of the quests in RPGs are just so lame. One of them in Skyrim revolves around like, hey, I just made this sword for my father, but he's like 2 houses down that way, but I'm really tired. Could you take it for me? And he'll greatly reward you. And you take the sword to the girl's father, and he rewards you with 100 gold pieces. Like, wow. If only real life was that easy to make money. That would be so cool. Anyway, Warcraft. The Alliance and the Horde, you could play as either the Alliance or the Horde, but you couldn't interact with each other. You couldn't talk, like, if you played a human and you met an orc, you couldn't talk to each other. you can only interact with your own faction. But the alliance, when it first started, was the humans, the gnomes, the dwarves, and the night elves. And I love the gnomes. The gnomes were my absolute favorite. I like the Taurens, but the gnomes were my favorite because they're just these little 2 foot tall dudes. I made a gnome warrior, and warriors are like the backbone of fighting. Like that's all they do is fight. Nothing fancy about them. So I always called him like a mini tank because he was in full plate mail with a shield and a sword. It looked like a butter knife, but it was still fun to play as a gnome warrior because it's so absurd, but so cool at the same time. And the horde was the orcs, the trolls, the tauren, and a renegade faction of undead called the Forsaken. So you could pretty much play as a zombie. How could you not like that? And yes, it is a zombie because there is an ability that the undead have called Cannibalize, where if you're low on health, you hit that button, and your guy gets down and starts eating the dead that are surrounding you. It's disgusting, but so cool. Burning Crusade added 2 new races. It added the Draenei, which are like these blue alien. That's the best way I can describe them. They're aliens to the Alliance, and the Blood Elves to the Horde. And a lot of people that were playing the game brought up the fact that, well, why are the Blood Elves with the Horde? Because elves are usually Alliance. And the reason is, and I would explain this to people because I'm such a nerd, in Warcraft 3, The Frozen Throne, one of the storylines was the Blood Elves are kicked out of the Alliance for getting help from one of the enemies of the game. So they're basically kicked out of the Alliance, and they have nowhere to go, so they join the Horde. Because it's, again, survival. They are only joining the Horde out of strictly necessity, because they can't do it on their own. They have to be with a faction, so they join the Horde. That was really the first, because when you've played the original game, I hadn't, but I'd heard, there was, each side had a specific class that only the other could play as. The Alliance had paladins, and the Horde had shamans. And they were pretty much the same, but very different. And with the new expansion, the 2 new races, you could now have paladins on the Horde, shamans on the Alliance, but you could only be a Draenei and a Blood Elf. The best expansion, in my opinion, was Wrath of the Lich King, where you finally got to finish off the storyline in Warcraft 3, where you could go to Northrend and fight the Lich King and the Scourge. They introduced Death Knights into that one, which basically was like, they called it a hero class. I call it just an elite. You could fight as an elite soldier because you were nearly invincible. If you spec'd it right, you could be nearly indestructible. I had a blood Death Knight. Like, there was 3 different kinds. I had a blood Death Knight where every time I hit somebody, I healed. Didn't matter. Like, I would heal for 2,000 hit points every single time I hit the guy. You couldn't stop me. You couldn't beat me unless it was a really high level guy. Then the other expansion was Cataclysm, which changed everything, because they had even said that the Blizzard company even said that we are going to change all of Warcraft. The world will change forever after this. This dealt with the dragon aspect called Deathwing, which is out to destroy the world. And from his emerging, Azeroth was sundered. It was completely changed forever. Some areas became flooded, some areas became completely destroyed, some areas were changed completely, and it was a way to attract new players, and it was also a way to bring old players back, because it was something completely different. And Then came Mist of Pandaria. That was the last one I played, where you got to play as the Pandarians, which everybody has pretty much gone on record as saying it's like playing Kung Fu Panda, because that's what they are. They're giant talking panda bears who know Kung Fu. And they were the first neutral race in Warcraft, but I have a lot I could talk about Warcraft. This will probably be 2 videos, but they are going to release another expansion now. The next one's going to be, I think, Warlords of Draenor, where you go back in time to before Outland became Draenor, or before Draenor became Outland. And yeah, but the reason why I stopped playing Warcraft was because I was letting it consume me. And by that I mean, I remember one day, I remember it very well, it was a Saturday. I had woken up around 6:30 in the morning. And I said, I have a lot to do today. I'm going to go to the bank. I'm going to do this and this and this and this. I'm going to play for 2 hours because the banks open up at 9. I'll play for 2 hours and go do my things. So I sat down, I booted up the game, I played, and I played, and I played, and I played. And by the time I looked at the clock again, it was 7:45 p.m. 6:30 a.m. I started playing. 7:45 p.m. is the first time I looked at the clock. That's what, 13 and a half hours? Yeah. That was when I was like a heroin addict. When I looked at the time and I saw that I had played that game for 13 hours straight. No breaks, no nothing. That was when I said, I think it's time to stop playing this game. Because it was starting to take over my life. And I didn't want it to. And I'm not saying that playing this game is going to do that. It's not. It doesn't do that. Playing any kind of video game is not going to turn you into an addict. You have to have moderation. And I know I'm starting to sound like a 12-step program, but it's true. If you allow yourself to sit in front of a TV all day and play a game, you're the only one to blame. And people would say, like, well, you know, it's the parents' fault, or, you know, it's my fault for allowing my child to sit there in front of a TV all day. You know what? Yeah, it might be. That's when you turn the thing off, pick them up by the scruff of the neck, throw them outside. It worked for me. That'll be another topic for this show, eventually, I'm sure. But, yeah, that was when I knew I had to stop playing. And I stopped playing for at least 2 years. I did buy Mist of Pandaria afterwards. And I booted up the game once. I booted up once in a while, but I never sat down and played as much as I did after that. After that 13 and a half hour stretch, I never let myself do that again. I literally put on the parental controls on the game and put, like, okay, 2 hours, and it would come up as saying, like, you are about to be logged off due to parental controls, and you cannot log back on until this time tomorrow. And you know what? It worked, because I would stop playing then, I'd come back the next day and only play a certain amount of time. And that's how I beat the addiction. If you can call it that, which I don't know if it was an addiction. It would be. But yeah. That's my little brief recap on World of Warcraft. I'm going to make another video about the things that I liked and what I didn't like about it, because there's still so much I could say about World of Warcraft. But I'm going to take a break. So, if you don't like World of Warcraft, that's totally your opinion. You don't have to sit here and watch this damn video if you don't like World of Warcraft. And don't tell me, don't put in the comment section, like, how could you like World of Warcraft? You probably will. I know somebody who might. I know who you are. So, stay tuned for part 2 of my Warcraft remembrance, I guess, memorial, memory. I can't talk. I'm not very learned, if you haven't figured it out by now. So, stay tuned for part 2. I'll see you in a minute.